I was really very moved this week by how many people were able to attend my presentation on the Israel-Hamas war, and by how many people were able to stay for the dialogue afterwards, which to me was perhaps the most important part of the evening. I shared my perspective based on all of my research on the causes of the current conflict and what happened and the chances for peace in the future, which I admit I shared were fairly bleak unless there were significant change across the board. But then we moved into dialogue where members shared things that they had learned from that presentation, if they had, and then things that either challenged them or comforted them. And it was a really powerful, really moving moment for me as rabbi of the community to see so many people, 60, 70 people, sitting, engaging in such loving, respectful dialogue. Not despite having different views, but specifically because of having different views. It was really very powerful. And I know we're going to have more similar discussions in the future. And so I ask you to be patient, to please keep an eye out for information from the Israel Committee. They're reaching out to various groups, to various speakers, and our hope is to have many more in the months and years to come. That presentation is done. Now there's another presentation that I'm giving. This time it's on Saturday, this coming Shabbat. Instead of Torah study in the morning, I'm going to be essentially acting as scholar in residence. We used to have these scholar in residence weekends. About 14 years ago, I started writing a book, and rabbinic life got in the way. And the idea of the book is on environmental theology, essentially, and how to totally reframe our Jewish practice around our new Jewish theology in the light of the changing climate crisis. While I was on sabbatical, I finished my notes. And that was a huge feat because it was about 30,000 type pages of notes. I have collected a lot of notes. And one of my difficulties has been how to try to get it all actually into chapters and into a book, because it's just so much. And so an idea that I had after discussing with a member of our community is to give some presentations to our community over the course of this secular year. And each presentation is essentially a chapter of my book. And that will help me really focus on the sources and really focus on what I mean to say in that particular section. And so, this coming Saturday, we have our first one. This is from Reimagining Judaism and the Environment. That's what we're calling them. This week, the fear and dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. This is from Genesis chapter 9, verse 2. And so what we're going to be doing is exploring our relationship with nature, humans' relationship with nature. Are we different from nature? Are we superior to nature? How can we be ecological? In other words, how can we reassess our Judaism in terms of us having a place in connection with other animals and creatures and plants and all other life? How can we have that instead of an environmental perspective, which tends to be very much top-down and just fixing the issue? And this question about how different are we from the animals and how different are we from the rest of nature is, I think, a really important question. Because, for example, we have a midrash that says, since the Holy Blessed One said, I have no satisfaction from these creatures, that's the rest of nature. It is nothing significant if the angels do my will, since they have no evil inclination, and I'm not obliged to reward them, since they only have a good inclination. From the beasts I derive no satisfaction, since they have only an evil inclination, and therefore cannot be punished. Therefore I shall create a creature so that both evil and good inclinations will enter them, and they'll struggle one against the other. And if the good will control the evil, it will be well for them, and if the evil will control the good, it will be ill for them. Let's just unpack that for a moment. God says, God is a little frustrated with the order of creation before human beings are created. There are angels who exist, but angels only do good. Angels only have a yetzer hatov, a good inclination, a heavenly inclination, a selfless inclination. So God says that's kind of boring because they're always going to do good. Contrasted with the angels are the animals. And God says they only have a yetzer hara, which here is translated as evil inclination, but one might translate it as selfish inclination or animalistic inclination. So God says that's no fun either, because they're just going to follow their own bodies, their own needs, their own immediate needs. They're only going to take care of themselves. What I need is a creature that has both good and bad. And so God creates humanity. And this doesn't come from nowhere. The idea here is that when you look in Torah, when you look in Genesis, when God creates the animals, vayitzer, when God forms them from the earth, there's only one letter, Yud. Whereas when God forms Adam from the earth, the verb vayitzer has two Yuds. And the rabbis say, look, this is actually a hint, because it's the same word spelled differently. So each Yud alludes to a yetzer, to an inclination. So the animals have only an animal inclination, and human beings have both an animal and a heavenly inclination. Animals only think of themselves, according to rabbinic literature, only take care of their own, whereas human beings have the possibility of choosing between taking care of their own or taking care of others. And just to be clear, this evil inclination, the yetzer hara, is not a bad thing necessarily. Another rabbinic text says that if it weren't for the yetzer hara, a person wouldn't get married, wouldn't get a job, wouldn't build a house. In other words, we do have to take care of ourselves. But if that dominates, that's a different thing. So here's the challenge, though, that in rabbinic literature, angels only do good. Animals only look after their own. Human beings have free will to choose between either inclination. And so this provides an interesting question to us, which is, for those who have a pet, does your pet have free will? Does your pet actually choose between right and wrong? Or does your pet just naturally follow their own instincts? It's a really interesting question because many people will have very different perspectives on this. And that's kind of the point of this study session, which is Judaism spoke in a fairly monolithic voice about our relationship to nature, that there was essentially a great chain of being. God, the angels, humanity, split man and woman, man higher, woman lower, and then the beasts, and then the rocks, and everything else inanimate. And that leads to some real problems. That leads to not just the authority to take care of the things that are below us on the great chain of being, but also somehow gives us very often the permission to abuse, to use, utilize for our own needs, that which is lower. And that may indeed be part of this patriarchal model, that man is above woman, who is above the beasts, and so on. So therefore man has power over the woman, man has power over the beasts, and so on. Whereas we in the 21st century, especially in Reform Judaism, have real difficulty with this. And so the question is, can we reframe our Judaism away from this idea of a great chain of being, maybe even away from the idea that only human beings have free will, or only human beings have culture? This is something that Moses Maimonides says. Maybe we can move away from that into a different understanding of our place in the world. And if we do, how does that change our Judaism? What does our new liturgy look like? What do our new rituals look like? And so on. So I'm going to be sharing this presentation after the Shabbat Shacharit service, after tomorrow's morning service. So the service itself is at 10:30, And we finish around 11:30, 11:45. And then I invite you to bring your own lunch, own brown bag lunch, I'd call it a pack lunch, your own brown bag lunch. And then I'll start the presentation about 12:30, 12:45. It will be on Zoom. There's a special Zoom link in this pre-Shabbat message. And if you want to, you can follow it on Zoom. If you want to, you can follow it in person. You can be part of the discussion. I'll be sharing quite a lot of sources, from Jewish sources and non-Jewish sources. And you'll essentially help me write this chapter of my book. And you'll be able to see where I'm going with this. And you'll be able to give me honest feedback. So I really encourage you, invite you, please come and join me tomorrow in particular. Not just tonight, of course, to join us for our Kabbalat Shabbat service, but also to join me in our Shabbat Shacharit service, and then in the first of 4 sessions on reimagining Judaism and the environment. This one particularly about what is our connection with nature. Are we the superior species? And if so, what does that mean? And what can we do to make our Judaism more ecological as opposed to just environmental? I've gone through, and I promise this is true, over 450 pages of notes. And so I'm very excited about this presentation. The handout is not 450 pages, don't worry. But it is extensive, it is exciting, and my hope is that it helps you consider your Judaism and our Judaism, our temple community's Judaism, anew, particularly in the light of the current extinction crisis. So please join us tonight, and please join me tomorrow, not just in the Shacharit service, but also in this first presentation. I think it's going to be very, very exciting, and I really want to hear your thoughts and feedback. And in the meantime, for those who have a pet, feel free to consider the question, does my pet have free will? I wish you Shabbat Shalom.